All right, hey guys, and welcome to another episode where we are going to talk about sexual orientation OCD. Sometimes this is known as homosexual OCD, sometimes this is known as gay OCD, or you could even, dare I say, call it straight OCD, and I'll explain that in a little bit because basically in this episode I want to talk about a subset of OCD where people analyze and obsess about their sexual orientation and it develops into an OCD cycle. And so again, this continues our series on intrusive thoughts. And so in the first section, we covered those, kind of intrusive thoughts around religion. Then we moved into harm. And now we're kind of covering the third section, which revolve around sexuality. And so in the last episode, we talked about relationship OCD. And I have a link down below in case you missed that. But this, with sexual orientation OCD, I find that this often kind of goes hand in hand with relationship OCD. So let's go ahead and start off by talking about just kind of what this is. So when someone's dealing with sexual orientation OCD or homosexual OCD, what's happening is that this person is locked on to this need to know for what their sexual orientation is. Okay? Now, in almost every case of this, again, this is not a sexuality issue, right? And that's kind of, the common theme that I've been talking about in this series, where OCD is going to tell you that the issue is this, and then people obsess about the content of the OCD, where as opposed to realizing that it's an OCD issue in the first place, right? So with religious OCD, it's not a am I going to go to hell issue or not? It's an OCD problem. And what's happening is there's this faulty alarm system going off in the brain, and it's telling you that this is the problem, and so people take it at face value. And that's essentially what's happening with sexuality OCD or sexual orientation OCD, is that the OCD is latched on the idea of, we need to know what our sexual orientation is, and then it arouses doubt in the person about whatever the theme is. So for instance, a person who has almost always had relationships with people of the opposite sex, what will happen is they'll have a thought enter their head one day that, well, what if I turn gay, or what if I found that person attractive and they're a person of the same sex? And what will happen is that anxiety will spike, and then they'll analyze and feel like they need to know if they are or aren't homosexual. Now, the thing is this can take on various forms. And like I was saying, when I call it, straight OCD, I know, another YouTube person by the name of Mark Freeman, made a video on that, and I thought it was really good. So a little shout out there. But what happens is that, I've worked with people who are straight that are worried that they might be gay. I've also worked with people who identify as gay and are worried that they may turn straight or may be straight, right? And that's why when we look at this issue, we have to realize that it's not a sexuality problem, right? And so that's kind of when I talk about what it is, just understanding that it's this obsessing and ruminating and analyzing and this need to know and need to be certain about one's sexual orientation. And what happens is it takes on the same four characteristics of obsessions, anxiety, compulsions, relief, and just builds and builds and builds and builds. And the more and more they try to figure the answer out, the worse and worse the problem becomes. So let's talk about, now that we know kind of what it is, let's talk about some kind of common things that you'll see in people with sexual orientation OCD. So someone with sexual orientation OCD, what they'll do is they will analyze many events, right? So, and this is kind of they might analyze how they feel when they stand around people of the same sex. They might analyze how they feel in certain movie scenes, whether they see a movie and it has, a homosexual scene or something like that. They'll analyze if they're aroused by that scene, they'll just kind of play it again and again in their head. And then, and also they'll spend a lot of time, analyzing their relationships, analyzing their past, whether or not when they, gave their friend a high five, did they want to hold hand? It's like it will just take on so many different forms, right? And so a lot of analyzing is what you'll see with people who struggle with this form of OCD. Now, some common compulsions, right, which we of course need to understand, are things like avoidance, right? Avoidance is a really big compulsion with this subset of OCD because people will avoid maybe going into locker rooms, or they'll avoid, using the bathroom around other men or women, right? Or they will avoid dating in many cases. And this is one of the hard parts about this particular form of OCD, because obviously it involves sex. They might avoid being sexually intimate with their partner, or avoid dating and sex altogether, because they just are their OCD is telling them that they need to have this answer before they engage in X or Y, right? And the problem is that what the OCD does is it takes this idea of attraction and, again, manifests it into that OCD lens that I talk about. And so they'll sit there and analyze if they're attracted to a person of the same sex, not realizing that it's completely normal to look at someone and evaluate whether they're attractive or not, right? And that's very different than, often than being sexually attracted to something. Right. And so they make this idea of, oh, well, I think that, other guy looks good, or he's handsome, or whatever. Or, if it's a female, I think she's pretty. And what happens is the OCD then takes it and runs with it and says, oh, well, you thought, so there's evidence that, you might be gay, or that, you might be straight, or whatever. Right. And it kind of runs with that theme. And so basically when we're talking about this and realizing that the compulsions are usually very mental, right? And it also is avoidance, and they also do reassurance seeking. So they may watch, they may look at attractive women and be like, okay, good, I was attracted to her, that's good, right? Or, a lot of times people will look at pornography, things like that, to reassure themselves that they're attracted. But oftentimes by doing that, they analyze their level of arousal, and because they don't have the experience or the arousal that they think they should have, it then causes a trigger, right? So it becomes a very big cycle sometimes with people with sexual orientation, and it gets very muddy, right? And that's why when we look at this, what we need to realize is that it's an OCD problem, right? And in order that we treat it like an OCD problem. So with the treatment of sexual orientation OCD is the same as any other form of OCD, and it comes down to exposure and response prevention, right? Because what we're looking for is to habituate to the alarm triggers that the brain's producing at this certain content, right? It's not the content that actually is the problem. It's the alarm system that's actually the problem, right? So we want to habituate to the alarm system to ultimately allow it to drop, right? And so as we do ERP, one of the things that we do is we kind of take the initial triggers, right, whether they're the thoughts, and we expose ourselves to the thoughts themselves. But then we also will do a lot of physical things, right? So if you avoid certain places, it means going those places, right? So going to locker rooms, sometimes as far as going to gay bars even, and and talking to obviously people of the same sex, or people that you may find attractive, that and really putting yourself in those situations, right? That's what the exposure is, and then preventing you from actually doing the avoidance compulsions or any of the other compulsions that you do, the analyzing, the ruminating. And the more and more we can expose ourselves to the feared situation and prevent ourselves from doing anything that's reinforcing that fear, what happens is that there's a natural habituation process that takes place. The anxiety levels drop, and you're able to see the thoughts and to see the whole concept of your sexuality in much more clarity than through the lens of that fear and the OCD. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, in this episode we've kind of covered what sexual orientation OCD is, or gay OCD, or homosexual OCD, and then we've talked about kind of some common symptomology as well as common compulsions, and then what kind of an overview of what treatment looks like, right? It really is about identifying those compulsions, removing them, right? And both on mental and physical level, right? And then allowing that habituation process to take place. So if you found this episode helpful, we have more resources available for you over at restoredminds.com. We have some links down below to lead you, to some direct free resources, assessments, things like that. And again, we always appreciate if you would subscribe and like and follow us on social to support our channels, because, just to help us get this information out to people that will find it helpful. And hopefully, as, more and more it gets out to people, more and more people are able to get help, and to ultimately create a better world and better society with people by developing better mental health for everyone. So thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us today, and we really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week as we continue on this series on intrusive thoughts. Thanks so much. Take care.